Hi, hello there. I'm gonna be back in a minute, give me a sec. Yes, it's me again. Bet you didn't want to see me, but you don't get a choice in the matter. Hi, welcome. As you can see, very tightly decorated model over here, that's right. I got a helmet. Just look at that shit. Catch this drip, motherfucker. You're gonna need it. Hi, yes, hello, welcome, it's me again. Long time no see. Today I'm going to be talking about the thing that was in the start, which is to say, the Hoplites. Not really. If you actually read the description, you'll know... You'll actually note that it has nothing to do with that. Matter of fact, it's completely lying. Much as I always do. No, this doesn't have anything to do with necessarily Hoplites. Or at least it didn't initially. You see, I recently watched, or well, stumbled into, I guess would be the better term, the movie The Odyssey by a certain Christopher Nolan. Oh, I'm just like poking out outside of view. Oh my god, FIFA Bay immersion break, what the fuck? What the fuck? You mean that my helmet's actually a little PNG? What the fuck? That's not normal. There you go. Anyways, now it looks normal-ish. Fuck me and my Pilos hat slash helmet slash Phrygian helm. Not really the Hoplite one, but some Hoplites wore them. The guys in Rome Total War, the Phalange guys. Phalangists? The guys with the pikes wear them. I'm just realizing you can actually see me looking at how to rotate the item. That's very funny. Yes, hi, I know how to rotate the item because I needed to know how to learn how to rotate the helmet. Very professional, I know. Anyways, hi, yes, I was watching that and I don't like the movie. It's very dark and not in the, like, thematic sense, because it really isn't that dark in the thematic sense. No, it's dark in the visual sense, as in I could not see shit for the life of me. Which is not good, in case it's not evidently obvious enough. Also, the costumes just looked cheap. They looked cheap, I'm gonna be real with you. They looked extraordinarily cheap. That shit was cheap as fuck, bro. You got that shit cheap as fuck, motherfucker, what the fuck? I should probably bring the video chat back up the top, shouldn't I? So when I invariably get a comment, eventually, it will be over my fat fucking head. And this truly is the darkest of days. Anyways, hi, yes. I'm very normal. Anyway, yes, my Macedonian bronze helmet that they stole in 1978, evidently. Creative Commons, you're gonna sue me, fuck you. Yeah, Nolan's Odyssey. I have some opinions on it, not many of whom are positive. As a matter of fact, I have quite a few negative ones insofar as it just looks very cheap. Like, it just looks cheap. Like, when you actually look at the costume design work, it's it's a lot of spray painted plastic they got going on. That doesn't even really look convincingly like leather. It's very obviously plastic. That's probably not what you want. My fat ass head's in the way. Hopefully you can see it when I'm talking about, like, with Agamemnon. Maybe I should move my fat ass head. Come to think of it, yes, I'm gonna move my fat ass head for your viewing pleasure. Ain't I a generous and benevolent god? Anyway, yes, hi. Is it capturing my cursor? I wonder if it is. If it isn't, well, you're just gonna have to look at it. I don't like this. This looks... can we not? Can we not? Can we not do that? Yeah, this doesn't look too good, honestly. I'm not gonna defend the we want it to be Mycenaean Greece appeal, because as interesting as it would be to attempt to get one like that, firstly, this is mostly chariot armor. We know that this would have been used on chariot back, not on the ground, although on foot rather, but there were some studies they did in Greece a few years back that proved that yes, you could reasonably fight in the armor, but practically be heavy and tiring, so you probably wouldn't want to. You definitely would want to be on a chariot when using it, and it seems optimized for protection in chariots, so armor like this probably wasn't ever going to be used on foot, nor would the general public really understand something like this. Which, you know, it's, you know, kind of sad on one hand that you could, you know, get something more interesting, and instead we got very, very cheap plastic. But it's not really even Nolan's costume work that's interesting to me. It's more the way that the generic hoplite is perceived in media. And oh, it's very interesting, but not terribly correct way of perceiving hoplites as hoplites. So as people, as soldiers, as citizens, and their fundamental role. It's kind of interesting to think about, because very clearly the Odyssey is trying to ape ancient Greece. The ever-vague nebulous ancient Greece that doesn't have a really specific time of existence, mostly. Just some shit back before the Roman days, basically, in the popular conscience. Conscious. In the popular zeitgeist. Let's use some fancy terminology to make up for me not being able to speak particularly well. Anyways, hi. I'm already getting onto a tangent. It's set in this vague, pseudo-archaic setting, yet it doesn't really know what it wants its hoplites to look like. What it ended up looking like was that, I'm just fighting for my life over here. What it ended up looking like was they just went to any warehouse in Hollywood and just picked whatever was immediately available, which didn't end well. Not every piece of armor is bad. This one isn't. I can see what they were going for, to try to dehumanize Agamemnon, make him look like an asshole, which in in Nolan's defense, Agamemnon, even in the actual retelling of the Iliad, is an asshole. But doesn't really work, mostly because, again, it just looks very cheap, honestly. Like, with metal, that's kind of not the usual reflectivity of it. This very much looks like car plastic, like the thing that a car's dashboard would be made out of. And you really don't want to give people that impression. I guess the, like, vertebrae at the back look interesting. They're at least an eye-catching element in a film that is massively terrified of color. Although, I will give them credit for the set designs, especially on the whole of Agamemnon, or rather the whole of Ithaca, I think. Yeah, because it takes place in Ithaca when he kills the suitors. I think this is also where this image is from, the beginning of the movie. I will give them credit. The interior design was a little bit more inspired, insofar as I could definitely see that whichever band of artists they hired to design the interiors definitely did look at what the Mycenaean Megaron looked like. And for instance, if I recall correctly, the throne in Odysseus's house, palace, something or other. And as far as I know, we only ever see the outside in one room of it, so who fucking knows what it is. That's the throne in Knossos, in the great palace of Knossos. So you can clearly see that somebody knew what they were at least trying to ape. Same with the columns. I recall in that large hall where he kills the suitors, which is the main set piece, obviously, the fight towards the end of the movie. The columns that actually hold the building up, to my knowledge, look very much like Minoan columns, which are very specific in the fact that they're very much narrower at the bottom than they are at the top. They look top heavy, effectively, um, which is good. You can clearly see that at least some effort was made, and so too in some of the armor, some of the weapons, rather, the arms, not the armor. The armor is uninspired, to say the least. Some of the weapons, some of the handles do strongly remind me, at least, of daggers and sword hilts that were found in caches like in Mycenae. Like it is evident to me that at least somebody on the design department knew what the Bronze Age looked like. And from my understanding, it's very much Nolan who pushed anything to this side at best, leaving it to mostly just sit there as a nice to have decoration, I guess. It's kind of sad because you can very clearly see that a fair number of people very likely on the design team, were at least aware of what the Mycenaean world looked like, and that Christopher Nolan specifically seemingly went out of his way to ensure that the movie looked nothing like the era of either ancient Greece that was trying to portray, nor of Mycenaean Greece, and very much went with the generic ancient soldier look, which is very much what I think you could get from this. Where can I open link? No, where can I view the image? Open image in new tab. I don't know who this is. I don't know if it's copyrighted. I don't care much. You can see, especially with handle, it does look like they at least bothered to look at what some Mycenaean handles looked like. But then you have this, whatever this is. I think this is a scene from earlier on in the movies. And beyond just dunking on it for looking cheap, which it does look cheap, it very visibly looks like plastic that they spray painted. I wanted to have a more nuanced discussion about how this armor design lets us infer the modern, or rather, gives us a clue into what the modern psyche imagines a historic hoplite would have worn, and or what they were fundamentally, which is, I think, a much more interesting discussion than movie bad, haha, it looked no good. Because it looked no good very much is true, but it looking doo-doo doesn't really say anything. It very much is just a statement. I should probably turn the BGM off, come to think of it. I can move myself back as well. Hi, welcome. Welcome back. I'm going back to my hole. I don't think I'm capturing my cursor, come to think of it, so I probably need to capture my cursor. I am capturing my cursor, I'm just stupid then. Anyways, yes, hi. Back in the scene. Ooh. What does this armor design tell us of the modern conception of a hoplite in the popular conscience? In the popular conscious. What does it infer about the role of the hoplite, and what connection does that perception have with the reality of what the hoplites most likely were? And I say most likely because anybody who says anything in absolutes when talking about history is very much just making shit up. We do not know a lot. We know a fair amount, but we don't know everything, so making any absolute statement is not typically a good idea, one might say. So let's just analyze for a minute the costumes that Odysseus and gang are actually wearing at the moment. So, beyond the standard cliche of I can actually draw with this, I think. Can I? No, I can't. I want to draw with my pen for fuck's sake. Can I not draw? Am I not entitled to drawing my shit? What the fuck? They are denying me. I even went through all the effort of setting up my drawing tablets that I can commentate on this, and yet still I am denied at the last moment. Ah, oh god, what is this? You have to sign in to use the whiteboard app. Nah, Microsoft, I think I won't. Thank you very much. I guess I'm going to download this as a screenshot. Just say visible. Yeah, sure, say visible. Why not? Sure, fucking. Who cares? Can you see any of this? Hi, if you can. May as well. Would certainly be about as useful. Yeah, you could probably see it. I should have opened that in Krita because I'm going to be drawing in Krita. So why didn't I open it in Krita? Reasonable choice. Let me finagle and fadoodle my way into an actual coherent sentence first, then we'll be on it. Krita, in case you're interested, is my preferred drawing program, so that's why we're going to be doing it in Krita. Is that necessarily a good idea? Debatably. Debatably indeed, very much debatably. Can we fucking load in, please? Thank you, Lord Jesus. In case you're interested, my PC is gonna explode in a minute. Because yes, it is genuinely that dog shit. Somehow it just keeps getting worse. I can also open another one that I saved beforehand because I'm a dutiful little boy and I do my work very well. Not really. Just I'm waiting for Krita to load in because it's relatively slow to actually get going, but it will get going eventually. What can we actually see and infer rather from the costume that we see here of who these guys are in a societal sense, who these guys are in a narrative sense of the word. Ah, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Yes, indeed. We are back, gentlemen. And we are going to stop capturing this window. We are going to capture the jack shit, apparently. Game capture? Is that's what wants to capture Krita, fucking apparently. Well, oh, alright, sure, why not? Hi, yes, welcome to capturing Krita now. Nope. Of course it didn't want to capture Krita. There, can we capture this now? Please don't do this to me. Oh, is it because of the background? Nope, not because of the background. I don't want to work at fucking yes. Cool. Cool, excellent, awesome, honestly. Awesome sauce. Is it? Ah, welcome. Apparently now it's decided that it really wants to fucking work. How strange. Hi, yes, welcome to my drawing circle, where I be drawing circles in case it's not obvious enough. So what can we actually see from these dumbasses? Well, firstly, crests. What does a crest generally signify? Good damn motherfucker, this shit stuck dick. This shit suck dick and balls, nigga. Oh my god. That's so fast fuck. Right. So, crest. Crest? Dear God. Crest. What does a crest typically imply in modern culture? Prominence, mostly. Back in the day, it was a form of decoration, mainly. But these days, it very much is important. It says, hey, look at me. beyond just the bracers, which are obviously not particularly historical and didn't really exist, but that's a discussion I think has been talked to death over. It's not really directly relevant to our story. Clearly, they have some armor, so they clearly have some arm defense, right? In fact, you know that the Mycenaeans actually, because their language was logographic, had a pictogram for armor that looked like this, interestingly enough. It signified a full suit, in case you're interested, not just a breastplate, or I guess that would be a cuirass. It designated a full piece of armor, kind of like how chariots were depicted with a spoked wheel. Like that was a chariot. If you had a chariot, you would write a spoked wheel. That's cool. So they clearly have some form of armor, right? That implies obviously that they're soldiers. Does that imply anything about social class? In Nolan's Odyssey, the all the armor firstly looks the same, and secondarily doesn't look particularly nice. So probably not, right? Probably isn't gonna tell you a whole lot beyond that they do be fighting, which you can also infer by the sword here, which is sharp and will cut your dick off. Interestingly, an interesting choice, I think, throughout the entire movie is that characters wear pants, which is, for an ancient Greek setting, a very interesting choice. They are very modern, a very modern form of clothing, obviously. They obviously didn't exist back in the ancient era. These niggas would be balls out swinging. No, genuinely, they rarely wore underwear, and if they did, it would be a kind of loincloth most of the time. Effectively, a diaper would be what they would be wearing. So they certainly wouldn't be wearing pants. Pants were considered the epitome of barbarism in Greek culture at that point in history. I think we've dissected the Nolan Odyssey thing enough. I guess you can also say, because you can clearly see that there is musculature on their actual breastplates, that they're also masculine. So, you know, that's good. Mars and all that, cool. So they're clearly a standard of masculinity, more so a standard of modern masculinity than what the ancient Greeks would have looked like or considered masculine. Although Greek standards of beauty were relatively similar, at least male wise, to our modern standard of beauty. So, so you can clearly tell what they're warriors, they're fighters of some sort. They're relatively important because they have crests, right? But you can't really say a lot beyond the fact that they're armored and that they are modern because they're wearing skirts. Which, I mean, that's fine, I guess. It's not really relevant, but fine. I guess I may as well preemptively open the other thing I have saved. If I can find it, that is. Aha, here it is. And this is a ancient Greek vase around the year 750. I think it was found in Athens, in rather the cemetery slash necropolis of Athens, because I'm gonna get to that of material. I'm gonna get to the material culture of archaic Greece. Just you wait. We got the big important stuff now. God, Jesus, I should shut the fuck up. Just give it a minute. It is that slow. Hi, welcome. This is the other thing I was wanting to show. So it's an amphora, a vessel for wine mostly, and you can see something that is presumably supposed to either depict heroic battle or just normal battle. In my opinion, because of the prevalence of these crests and also the very specific kind of shield that's figure eight shield, effectively, because in the Mycenaeans, it's an interesting holdover because the Mycenaeans, for their part, also used figure eight shields, although not typically with these cuts in them. This is a relatively later invention, often associated with Asia Minor, specifically with, and sometimes with the Thracians. The Mycenaeans typically had large figure eight shields, much like the Minoans, which looked like this, of basically two loads. Sometimes they would have a boss on each end. I think I could actually find it if I wasn't fucking stupid. Yes, there you go. Welcome, yes, these shields, the figure eight ones, that would often have a central boss or crest on them. Let me just fight God and reality and get back the window capture. Hi, yes, these ones, the ones I'm pointing to right now, including this is a good one. Warhistory.org. Sorry that I'm stealing your shit. I like it though, it's very nice. This is probably what a average Mycenaean likely, Minoan probably not, but Mycenaean certainly soldier would have worn. Or would have been recognizable basically in the time period. Is my fat head in the way? Yes, yes it is. Okay, hi. Very so likely this is a mess. This. Okay. This artist. I followed this artist on Twitter. Shout out to him. He is a very good artist. Uh, Not directly relevant. Just want to shout him out because it is a good piece of art, and I think everybody should be commended for it. Um, so yeah, you can see the kind of large shield that they would have worn alongside, obviously, Bortos helmet. Also, interestingly, here is a bronze helmet, which surprisingly kind of looks like the one in Nolan's Odyssey, except without a crest mostly, and also with an uh, actual neck protection. Vortos helmets and decorated helms are probably more common in this period. This is Minoan, but the Mycenaeans would have worn broadly similar arms and armor to the Minoans. The Mycenaeans would have had relatively similar material culture to the Minoans. It very clearly aped the Minoans in a lot of ways. So take this to be a relatively good example of what you may well have seen on the battlefield of Troy during history, or if the Battle of Troy happened in history, you may have seen this relatively commonly. I will actually go and open a bookmark because I do have one. If I saved it, I didn't save it. I'm a fool. I'm a fool indeed. I thought I did have it saved, but no, I didn't have it saved. Fuck. I didn't save my thing that I wanted to show. Maybe it's gonna. It's like Greek Age of Bronze. Of Bronze, I did do that. Um, this site, very fun. Shout out to well, whose ever site this is. Yeah, Andreas Lambetti. Shout out. I. Uh, Anyways, yes, we can actually go into the armor and helmets of the Minoans, Mycenaeans, and the other gang. And you can actually see they do have very, very pronounced crests. Some even have horns on them, which is really interesting for the age. This is, by the way, an excellent resource if you just want to get accustomed to the material culture and to a lesser extent the society of Bronze Age Greece. It's very interesting. I honestly very much like it. It's got a lot of good art. It's got a lot of good resources you can use. And it does give a good idea of what would have been normal and what wouldn't have been normal in the Bronze Age. And why am I talking about the Bronze Age when we're talking about the Hoplites? Well, firstly, because obviously we're talking about Nolan's Odyssey. Secondarily, do these relate to each other? No, mostly. Minoan warriors and hoplites of the later ages don't, but the Greek Dark Age, warriors of the Greek Dark Age that took a part of material culture from the it's Hagia Triada. This is a very important site in case you're interested in Crete, which gives us a lot of important important data. It involved actually. There's a tomb of a prince because Hagia Triada itself is a Minoan palace or palace production center. They were one and the same. There were more workshops in the Knossos, certainly. Importantly, burial of a notable individual was found with a significant cache of material goods there. Something also to note, the Minoans and the Mycenaeans practiced internment, i.e. burying somebody. The Greeks of the Dark Ages mostly practiced not inhumation, which is burial, but uh, incineration, basically cremation, I guess is the English term for it. Dear God. Uh, and they would have typically burnt their dead. Certainly, their heroic dead would have been burnt on pyres, which is something that, for instance, survives in the Odyssey or Iliad, not really the Odyssey, where, for instance, after Achilles is slain, his body is set alight on fire. Why? Because that's the way for Greeks of the Homeric age, which is the late Archaic period, they would have considered cremation to be the most noble form of death. And then later on, during the classical period, you have kind of a mixture of inhumation and cremation. And then towards the latter end of antiquity, in the Roman period, you again start to see mostly cremation with a little bit of inhumation. And then when Christianity takes over in late antiquity, at that point, very much standard inhumation. And from there on, it's just inhumation from all the way. Uh, which is important for material culture because that's one of the reasons why we know a lot more, for instance, about classical Greek hoplites who sometimes may be buried than the cremated sort that would often just have been stuck in a jar and then buried. And then oftentimes a temple, especially in the Dark Age and in the Archaic period, would have been built on top of them. I think it's called a Huron. No, you write a Huron. Huron, is that what I'm thinking about? How would you write that? Basically, no. This is a dance in Turkey. Not what I'm after. Not what I'm after at all. Basically a small shrine slash house that would have been. Maybe I can get. Heroic, no, heroic. Yes, thank you. Give Grandpa's some time. Grandpa's is getting on in years. I'm a little bit retarded. I'm a little bit retarded. You have to understand. Yeah, Lefkandi. By the way, if you're ever in Greece and are interested in that's how you write it. Huron burials. I know German because I pronounce it Huron. Huron. Yes. Is it Huron? I guess that's how you would pronounce it. It means heroic, in case you're interested, or heroic thing. Burials, typically not inhumation, would have been cremated. They would have been this is. So what you're seeing here is a longhouse, a great house, effectively in Lafkandi. I'm getting terribly distracted. Shut up. I'm getting way too distracted. Anyway, they buried this motherfucker under the floorboards, which is a typical burial practice in this period. Or rather, they buried him and then built a building on top of it. Although there was also an earlier building there. But, you know, they built it and then they sacrificed horses, and this was very clearly a very important figure, and Lakandi is kind of the largest known site of the Dark Age. There are also some other sites. Samos, the island of Samos, is important because it also kind of survived relatively less destroyed than the rest of Greece. Same with the it starts with an H. Korea, I think. Could be wrong. Could be wrong. I will admit I could be entirely wrong on the name. It's in Messana. Or Messina? Messana. No, that's on the thing that that produces most of Greece's olives these days. That one. There's also an important site there. What the fuck are you? Get the fuck away from me, bitch. I love my Greek period. What the fuck? Also, yeah, shout out to thought.com. They got my thought in the dark.com. That shit fucked up, bro. Maybe this has a better picture of what my dumbass is trying to refer to. Or maybe not. Maybe I am just out on a limb here. Nope, doesn't. Okay, we're gonna be drawing now. You've been warned. Try to do it the nice way? You just had to do it the hard way, didn't you, huh? Okay, I see how it is. No, that's fine. What is this? Get away from me, you beast. What? No, fuck off. You. Be like smaller. Jesus Christ, man. Jesus Christ, man. What the fuck? They got this shit on lockdown, motherfucker. Dear God, what am I doing? Just drawing random shit. Okay, so typical site in the Dark Age, Greek Dark Age, right? Right? I can't even see where my own fucking cursor is. Dear God. There, it's entirely white. Why was it white? Okay, what would it have looked like? Top down view. So this is a bird's eye view from above. This is from above what it would look like. Effectively, a Huron is a little building, and like Greek houses of the Dark Age, it typically was rounded off, so it wasn't a rectangle, which is the typical form taken, for instance, in both the Mycenaean and later Greek period. No, they cut this bit off. So that's the physical structure. The typical appearance of one would have, well, been frankly very unimpressive. It was usually a wooden construction. Sometimes it would have maybe had a layer of stone on top, depending on the circumstance. Certainly it would have been, typically they would have been thatched. Oh god, I cannot draw in perspective for the life of me, so you've been fucking warned here. Right, it would have looked kind of like that. This is awful. This looks atrocious, dear God. Thank you, Rita, for saving you retarded piece of dick. We live in a small hut, to be clear, so don't think of anything impressive. Usually thatched. There's a little reconstruction in the museum, in a museum dedicated to Lefkandi, in case you're interested. A little reconstruction of the building. I could probably find it in my archaeology professor's actual presentation. Oh, and they sometimes would have had the base of stone or cobble, effectively. So just imagine these are cobblestones. I guess we should just draw it like that, but they wouldn't have been bricks the way I'm drawing currently. I'm just trying to illustrate that these are stones here. because I'm not very smart and I can't draw very well. So this is the top-down view of the building. This is kind of in a terrible perspective, right? But just give it some flair, some pizzazz here. They typically wouldn't have had um, any kind of like windows or anything. These would have been small constructions. A door would probably be present. Likely, what you would have found was an altar present, which would have just usually been a small box or usually with an indentation in the middle. Maybe a small statue or a figurine. I think I can actually show you that because I do think I actually have something to show you there. Hopefully, I'm not that dense. Where is this? Because I definitely know that there are little figurines we have back from the Dark Age. And we get anything here. Nicoria. Nicoria is the sign I'm thinking of. I'm very smart. This is the Dark Age, so the age after the Greek collapse, but before the Oriental slash archaic period. Oriental in art, pottery. Archaic in like a typical historical categorization. I don't know how to describe it. Can I find it anywhere? I'm not sure I can. Oh, I can actually. Good. Okay, yes, I can actually show you. I did find them by luck alone, but I did find them. What do I want to? Get the fuck out of my house. Very funny, very funny. So I guess I can show this. It's kind of not what I was actually looking to show, but here you can see the building, right? Like this little building, and then there's a goddess inside, and these retards on top. Not really what I was looking to show. I'm just desperately flailing around trying to find just anything to show you, which I thought would be a lot easier than it turned out to be. So, dear God. Turns out this is kind of difficult. Maybe I should have prepared a bit more. I did prepare a little bit. Did prepare a little bit. Fuck you, I did prepare a little bit. Let's see what we can find. Apparently, Jack and shit. Aha, we can actually see, burials rather, very useful. Is this showing? No, it isn't. Okay, hi, burial proto-geometric period around 1000 BC. It's in Athens. Why? Because Athens was depopulated but continued to be inhabited even after the fall of the Bronze Age, although the actual palace was abandoned and burned quite early on, actually, during the collapse. In the post-palatial, it was inhabited, and it was basically continuously inhabited throughout basically all of human history, effectively, since the Neolithic. It never really suffered a period of large-scale depopulation. I'm just trying to showcase that a specific graveyard in the ancient city of Athens was continuously used for multiple centuries and is a key insight into the material culture of, firstly, the geometric, because we have a lot of, for instance, pottery from the geometric period, then the archaic, and then even the classical until it kind of got overfilled, and then kind of during the Hellenistic period, we don't really see a lot of burials in that graveyard because it would have been already very much at the center of the urban area, so it kind of moves and then it gets forgotten and eventually it's built over, interestingly enough, which is the main reason why it survives to this day. you can actually see in the burial these things that look like really long sewing needles. These would have actually been used for hair for pinning clothing actually, and you can see a bead necklace. You can also see a lot of wares, and these are relatively simple wares. Interestingly, these would have not been made with a potter's wheel. These would have been manually layered effectively, which is kind of a distinctive feature of the proto-geometric period. I'm getting terribly off track. I am so sorry to whoever wants to learn anything about hoplites and then clicked on this video under the mistaken assumption that I would be talking about hoplites. I'll get there in 2 or 3 hours time, don't worry about it. But we're still in the Dark Age. So, the Dark Age Greek warrior would have had maybe a shield, a spear, or a sword, and told to go fuck himself. There are, in the Dark Age, no professional warriors. Warriors would have just been any member of the tribe, because Greek society at this time has mostly devolved into semi-nomadic pastoralist farmers, mostly. Later on, during the end of the Dark Age, you start to see a larger number of permanent settlements. And then in places like Lepkandi, and specifically the island of Evia, uh, you see a lot of things start to pop up pretty quickly, which is why again Lepkandi, which is the main like site, name it today, it's kind of the center of Euboea, or Evia, however you want to pronounce it, doesn't really matter, not really relevant. Becomes very important, very, very important for our understanding of the late Dark Age, effectively. Um, so this is an interesting example of a burial. There were still some shaft burials, but increasingly... Oh god, I'm juggling way too much shit. Increasingly, by this period... So this is the center of the altar, which would be here, in case you're interested, would be located here. So what's underneath this building? Well, it would typically be built on a mound. So like a mound of shit relative to the rest of the environment, right? What's underneath the mound? Because this isn't a natural mound, mostly. Good question you ask. A crater, usually. And not kind of an impact crater. I mean crater in the sense of ancient Greek pottery, which is a large, like... Oh god, I'm gonna fuck this up so badly. It has a flared base down here, and then... Okay, so this effectively is a crater, and it would have been decorated with little, little guys doing little guy things like dying and shit. This is a horse. It does horse things. Geometric art at its peak. And we have a curvy line here because we're stylish. Right? This is the peak of Dark Age beauty and fashion. This is the peak of Dark Age fashion. Look it up, honey. It's called style. These would have been for handling in case you're interested. And typically you would have shoved the dead guy's ashes into the crater rather. And then that shit would have been typically buried, so here, effectively. And it's buried underneath there, and then there's a little temple, and then it's a heroic grave. And then at Lefkandi, effectively, what we see is a much bigger building. But again, typical Dark Age style. And then we see a dude buried in here. This is dude. And then we would see multiple horses actually buried beside him, slain for their master. I think there were 3 or 4. I mean, I just read it, so you'd really hope I fucking remembered rightly. And then, what was I trying to draw there? And like there, this is not the exact layout in case you're interested, but it's there to show what it would have typically looked like for a Greek Dark Age burial for somebody of elite status, especially later on. Why is this relevant? Firstly, there would have also often been like little figurines and dudes in there as well, ceramic figurines. Um, that I will try to find if I can. Not the easiest thing in the world, but we'll get to it eventually, don't worry. Geometric card, maybe they have a little figurine I can use? No, they don't. They unfortunately do not. Yes, unfortunately they don't. Unfortunate. I can actually show you what a crater looks like. Fucking obviously, you really hope. Yes, this is what I was attempting to draw in case you're interested, dear God. Uh, that. You have to say, it's a striking similarity to what I drew, isn't it? In case. Oh god. Oh lord, I need to drink more water. My throat is extraordinarily dry. I am very sorry. I'll be back in a bit. Hi, it's me again. Sorry for the interruption. Um, um, what was I on about? Yes. I shut the crater off. Let's see if we can find any figurines that would be that I know exist because I fucking saw them. I'm finding exactly one currently. That's good. Nope, we're immediately into the archaic. Well, fuck you too. Guess this is the best one you're fucking getting now. Um, Look at that guy. He's so swag and suave. Look at him. These would be the type of figurines you typically also find in these heroic burials. Why are they useful to this discussion? Because they give us a glimpse into the material culture of Greek Dark Age warriors. Because, like in pretty much all periods of Greek history, martial capabilities and martial strengths are a major part of. Let's just lower myself down even a little bit further, so I'm not constantly clipping in to the screen. My helmet rather isn't constantly clipping out of my little cubby box that I have. It's important for understanding the material history and development also of later Greek warfare, because our main sources for the warfare, equipment, and martial culture of the Greeks of later periods, specifically of the archaic and the classical, partially come from written sources, especially later on, but mostly come from pictographic and material archaeological, or rather it's all archaeological evidence, pictographic and material remains typically but not exclusively associated with burials. These little figurines thusly are pretty important since they give us an insight into what the people of the Dark Age would have worn, what they would have fought with, which, in case you're wondering, would be simple shields, often decorated with geometric patterns, and not really much more, really. Very simple. These would not have been professional soldiers. Again, these are semi-nomadic herder societies, so they would have been practicing farming. They knew farming, but they also would have been practicing herding, particularly goats and sheep. And a shepherd, by necessity, oftentimes has to be a good fighter because there are wolves and other shepherds that may be looking to take his flock. There's a reason why shepherd's stick is often, even today in modern Christian art, used as a guiding tool, but also something to corral and control the flock and defend it with. Same reason why, for instance, shepherds were often valuable as slingers. Typically carried slings, especially in this period, but I mean, up into the 20th century, really, especially in the Balkans. um, and yeah, they would have known how to use a sling. I'm not talking about those little shitty slingshots that like Western kids play around with. I mean, just a satchel with a rope and a fucking rock in it. You could have easily killed someone with that. And they were often valued, shepherds in particular, because they often would have had plenty of opportunities to learn how to use a sling effectively. Same with hunters, for instance. The hunters of the Balearic Islands were praised as slingers, um, oftentimes because they grew up on islands of relatively agriculturally sparse. They often hunted, and typically the hunting implement was a sling, so they often became very well trained to hit small, fast-moving targets, which made them excellent marksmen, which meant that on a battlefield they could really start doing some damage against the Romans. This is again a terrible tangent that's not directly related to what we're speaking about, but these would have been professional soldiers. At the end of the Greek Dark Age, you start to see firstly villages reappear as a permanent fixture, although villages, settled areas never really disappeared. Again, these are semi-nomadic populations. They would have lived very similarly to how nomads continued to live in the Balkans up until the 20th century. The Ottomans and Tsars, for instance, continued living in this way of life into the 1920s, really until modern nation states and borders forced them to stop being herders and shepherds. Um, they would typically, during summer, drive their flock of sheep or goat up into the mountains into open meadows where they would eat and feast. Meanwhile, a small skeleton crew would be running what was a small village in a valley inside the mountains. And then during winter, when it became colder and the grass dried up north, they would rather steer their flock back from the mountain meadows into the valley, where they would camp out in the village. And typically, that's how life went. That's why I use the term semi-nomadic instead of nomadic, because they wouldn't have been nomads. They had homes, they had territories, but they were highly mobile. They could move from one valley to another if resources were depleted, and they moved within a valley from the lowlands, which would have also been had some sporadic agriculture, to the actual meadows where the animals would feed for most of the summer. And this is very much something we see in the Dark Age. These small tribes, often a few dozen people at most, just eking out an existence with very small villages or just small settlements, really. And it's only really towards the end of the Greek Dark Age and the beginning of the Archaic that we start to see the rise of places like Samos, on the island of Samos, which had a 5 meter thick fucking wall around it at one pretty quickly. So clearly things got violent. But also in mainland Greece, Lefkandi, Nicoria, but also Athens, Pylos, although Pylos got kind of abandoned actually, so that's probably not the best one. In Messana, the one again famous for its olives, that I'm probably horribly forgetting the name of. There again, we see, well, that's where Nicoria is. So, that's, there you go. But also in Achaia, so north around the area of Monte Patras, you start to see larger settlements in Boeotia, around Thebes, and Orchomenos. But actually, not so much Orchomenos, it's mostly Paleocastra at this point, because Orchomenos would have been long abandoned at this point. In Attica with Athens, obviously, although not exclusively just around what would become Athens. More up north again, Thessaly starts to become more thoroughly populated. The so Locris, Doris, and what's the third one? Locrida, Dorida. Getting a and the third one, Phokida, Focus. It's Focus, Locus, and Doris. Dear God, that doesn't sound right. I really hate these AI ones. I specifically put multiple words that are banned, and yet every time they come up with a new combination, it's really annoying. Anyway, we start to see, for instance, local cultic centers emerge. So these heroic burials gradually give way to larger complexes. We see this around places like Olympia in Elis, but also around what would become the center of the Greek world, the well, the Oracle at Delphi, which grew up from a relatively minor cultic center in the Dark Age and became, by the Classical period, just the beating core of Greek religious life, more or less. What we see with this development is also the development of more differentiated social stratification. The chiefs of the Dark Age become the basileos, singular, of the early kingdoms of Greece. Basileus itself, we know the origin of the term. It appears as a Mycenaean title, Galsileos, which kind of could be understood as field marshal, leader of the people, kind of the guy. The Galsileos would have been responsible for organizing the armies of the palaces effectively and waging war. Although kings would also have been expected to lead war parties. Mycenaean warfare, again, is a whole different thing. Focused around chariots, mainly sieges alongside pitched field battles, where large chariot armies are the focus of conflict. Um, there also are known. Certainly, there would have been complex alliance structures in which Mycenae seems to be the most important city, kind of like how we know that the island of Knossos likely had some degree of political unification, but how much exactly we can't say. That's the Minoans. That's very much in the past at this point. I mean, the Greeks of this age wouldn't even know the Minoans existed. If the Mycenaeans knew the Minoans existed, certainly these Greeks of the Dark Age had no clue, and the early ones of the Archaic chalked it up to Minotaurs. So, yeah. As these Basileoi emerge in the end of the Dark Age, the beginning of the Archaic period, we also start to see the development from tribe into early city states. And this isn't universal. For instance, even well into the classical period, for instance, in places like Epirus, Macedonia, even further up north, where some really isolated Greek tribes lived, and even in certain areas of Arcadia, for a long time, you don't see the development of polices. The polis, the city, doesn't develop. They stay as effectively tribes, oftentimes led by an anax. Anax is from the older Mycenaean term for Vanax, which means king. That would have been the title, for instance, that Menelaus and Odysseus and Agamemnon would have used for themselves. So it's Anax, and then you see when the palaces fall, then the Gausileus, who would be the organizer of the armies and the leader of the people. That's the title that interestingly stays in most of Dark Age Greece. Interesting, isn't it? Wonder what that can tell us. But not really the point. As social differentiation and territories become more well defined, as cities settle down, as agriculture develops and becomes the primary basis of sustenance for the population, they move from that semi nomadic pastoralism into fully settled agrarianism. Territorial fights start. You start to see an increase in warfare. You start to see an increase in mass graves, which are found occasionally, and they're pretty grisly. And you start to see walls popping up. And at this point, you start to see the development of a much more pronounced military culture that doesn't really exist in the Greek Dark Age, which is where the Hoplites come from. The old warriors of the Greek Dark Age, informal, often armed with whatever was around fighting for the tribe, give way to citizen soldiers who fight firstly for kings and then later for the city itself after things start to fall apart. For instance, places like Athens, you still see the role of a king. There's the title of a king even well into democracy, into the period of democratic rule. But then that is basically just a religious figure, like the chief priest of the city, which implies that the basileos of the Athenian or whatever tribe lived in the area of Attica eventually became politically irrelevant. Certainly by the time of Dracon and the Draconic laws, as far as we know, the oldest laws. Dracon is a semi-mythical figure. Solon's kind of the first person we really know that was absolutely, definitively a historical figure, like a physical person of flesh and blood. By that period, already it's clear that the king is relegated to a secondary function. Although again, king in the Western term, in the modern understanding of the term as an inherited position, very much isn't applicable in this point. It's chief. Chief would probably be the most effective way of describing the basileia of this period. Very much chiefs. Chiefs are often elected informally by the tribe. What I mean informally is there was no legal process by which you chose a chief. Just the most influential dude in the village became the chief, or in the tribe became the chief. And his role would have been similar to, for instance, judges, or rather would have been as a judge and as a war leader first. And then you see that necessarily means that he would have also been the high priest, effectively. And it seems that role, even when the monarchy loses all power and the royal house of Athens disappears, you start to see that role retained effectively as a vestigial little element of government, as laws are codified in the idea of the res publica, i.e., the public thing, the polis, becomes developed and becomes present in the consciousness of the Greeks of that age. The tribe disappears, the nation doesn't exist, it won't exist for a very long time. The polis, the city, is the dominant force at this point by the beginning of the Archaic, where these small villages start to grow, start to develop walls. So who defends them in conflict? Well, the descendants of those same warriors of the Dark Age, effectively. Except with increased social differentiation, you have a greater availability of resources, and resources start to be focused into individuals of great renown and prestige, kind of heroes. The Greek Dark Age, for instance, and likely in the early Archaic, warfare would have often taken a partially ceremonial role. We know this from oral accounts, for instance. Homer's description of battle in the Iliad is a good example of kind of a ritualized form of warfare where two champions normally fight. Same to a really old myth we have of a battle very, very much in the ancient past, even for the classical Greeks, was in the initial conflict between the Argives, so the people of Argos, from Argolis, which is where Mycenae used to be, but Argos grew up most because it was just a better position than Mycenae. And the Lacedaemonians, so the Spartans, when they start going on a war path, they conquered the West and they enslaved the people of the West and made them helots. And then they go marching north, and then they immediately run into the Argives, who give them battle. And how is battle made? Well, they fight over a plain south of Argos. And how do they decide who wins? Well, they both send their best champions. I think it's 300 or 500 each of their best champions, and then they agree to a place and time, and then they fight. And then the Spartans win, but the Argives are losers, and then they attack them, but the Spartans beat them back, even though it's uncouth, so the Spartans attack Argos. Not relevant directly, just trying to illustrate that there would have been a degree of heroic ritual combat, at least in part, in the warfare of this period, combined with increased concentration of wealth. What does that mean for our little Greek hoplite? Well, firstly, hoplite is still a nebulous term at this point. But what do we know for certain? Well, and this is also where I could actually bring up another thing I have saved, because I'm intelligent and smart and beautiful. I'm gonna close that one. I'm gonna open these two. Give me a minute. This one. Give it again. Takes some time to load. Sorry, my computer is really bad. What do we see? Well, firstly, we're gonna go back to this image. What is what is this image? So this image is from an amphora, again found in the cemetery in Athens. Beyond the shields, from which seem kind of like an archaic holdover, right? They aren't, but they seem. This is from around 750, so the kind of mid archaic, not really. Well, we're still pretty far away from the classical. The classical begins only with the Persian invasions, typically. That's in 5 something, so the 6th century. So this is still like 750, so we're a good 200 years away from the formation of the city state as like a large entity in geopolitical alliances. And we're relatively far away from the kind of large mass battles that would define, for instance, the Peloponnesian War. So what does this amphora actually depict? Well, it depicts armored men. You can see this man has a cuirass. And not relevant. And he has a helmet. What does this tell us, firstly? And obviously a very pronounced crest. Looks cool as fuck, honestly, and I'm so mad I don't have one. What does this tell us about the nature of warfare in the archaic? Also, like, you can actually see the ochre lines they made for the silhouettes after they were drawn. That's really cool. Because these were painted with different pigments, and this would be ochre, this red part. And then this would be black. This would usually be some kind of, I think it's manganese or some kind of material would have turned black. It could also just be a lacquer of some sort, and then you have white. It's really pretty, but you can see he has a cuirass. He has greaves, or rather, one of them has greaves. There you go. This guy has greaves to protect and sit on the leg. And you can see these guys have large shields, spears. This shield in particular, this round one here, this is the hoplon. You can see it's strapped. He's holding it here, but it's also strapped to him. This is, by the way, a sword, in case you're interested. It's in the strap of the shield, so I probably shouldn't have drawn it like that. This is likely the strap. This is a dagger that they would have carried alongside the main weapon, which is, again, the dori, the spear. This is an armored fighter. This isn't just a shepherd who's taken up a stick and is going to beat you with it, or has a knife for general use. These are soldiers. And again, they're depicted also half naked intentionally. Why are they depicted like that? Well, it would have been heroic, effectively, mostly. That's the main reason. They certainly in real life would have been fully armored figures like this guy. Again, would they have had protection on this end, on the upper leg? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, that's probably the best protected part of you, so. With the shield, your torso, and that's probably the best protected part. Like, you can also see like a primitive, this is a primitive Corinthian helm. Hopefully it's obvious, but my drawing isn't probably going to help a lot. I'll get to that very quickly in the actual development of the helmet. This is probably an early Chalkidian helmet. What do we know of warfare at this period? Firstly, these are soldiers. These aren't random bonefuck middle of nowhere hillbillies fighting. These guys have armor. They've been trained. They fight. They are either wealthy, because in the archaic, armor was extraordinarily expensive at this period. I probably should bring a better picture. Let's see if I can find a good picture of a hoplite from the early archaic. No, not this. Not likely this. Actually, no, this is a pretty good one. I mean, this is a bit of a Interesting reconstruction, but actually no, this is pretty fine. This is good. So I'll show this once I'm done with the picture I have here. This is proper armor. This is something that needed a blacksmith, that needed a skilled iron worker to make. And they're clearly fighting. Now, how are they fighting? That's kind of an interesting question. What do we see from this? What does this scene imply? Well, firstly, it's very clearly not supposed to be a lifelike depiction of combat. It's clearly stylized and ritualized. But what can we actually see? Okay, so we have multiple shields here, right? Multiple spears, they're taken overhead. There's some debate whether they would have typically used overhead spears in this way, because it's not the most efficient manner to use a spear, but, you know, certainly would have worked. You can certainly kill a man holding a spear like that, just probably not the most effective. Is this a phalanx, effectively, is our question, because we have later depictions of phalanxes, and they kind of look similar. So is this a phalanx? Good question. Honestly, we just don't know for the Archaic. Certainly the phalanx would have developed by the end of the Archaic and the beginning of the Classical. Sometime during the Archaic, a phalanx, in the sense that we would know today, would be developed. But in the early Archaic, probably kinda yes and no. There certainly would have been a battle line or an order of battle for the soldiers. Let me just get back to our little image here. There certainly would have been an order of battle. So again, this is a bird's eye view of dudes. This is how a typical phalanx is understood. Wall of shields, they actually interlock. Typically they would have done this, and then the other guy would have put his shield over, and then you would cover it, and that's the hoplite, in case you're interested. Here, and then in here, and then here, and then art is my passion. Art is my passion. Don't laugh. That dude, and then he's holding a spear here. Dude, he's here, and then another dude is like here. I think you're getting the idea, hopefully, but just in case my beautiful art's not really doing it for you. Another dude's shield's here, right? And so top down, it kind of looks like this. This is the typical image of what a phalanx is supposed to be, first and foremost. Is that what we would, if we went back in time to the Archaic, is that what we would have seen? Probably not, unfortunately. That's very much the typical image of the Archaic fighter. I almost said war fighter, but thank God it didn't. I didn't, because I had enough self-conscious to shut the fuck up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right there, and then second line here also has their shields up. And then this typically goes either 4 ranks deep, so 4, or 6, or 8, or even 12, or even 16, although 16 is kind of a Macedonian invention. 16 is kind of more like with pikes, so this is kind of just pike. Typically they wouldn't have gone further than 16, 14, because at 18, kind of that's like the end of critical mass. You don't really gain anything from having a denser formation than that. So it's basically a block, a cinder block. Phalanx means log in Greece, because it kind of looks like a log, like a wooden log here. Art is my passion, they said. You know, a log steamrolling over somebody. That's the idea. That's certainly what classical Greek texts imply would have been happening on the battlefield. It's probably a much more accurate phalanx with how shoulder to shoulder it would have been. Oh yeah, and would have been perfectly straight either, because we know this because of the way that, for instance, the Spartans would position their best guy on the left. Their most experienced soldiers and kings went on the left flank. Why? Because firstly, this guy doesn't have a shield in front of him, as you can see. And secondarily, I'm not muted, am I? This would be terrifying if I'm muted. No, I'm not. Good. Good, good. Um, sorry. This guy is probably the most experienced. Firstly, he's the most exposed. Secondarily, you can see as people fight, you effectively end up with a line, which means you're probably going to draw most fire from here. Oh, hi. Hello. Haven't seen. Oh, good. Well, I'm currently having a nerd fest about the Hoplite. So sit and listen if thou willst, or don't. Your choice. Um, Typically, this is what a classical phalanx would have looked like. Is this what an archaic hoplite would have fought with, though? Firstly, not only hoplites. Whilst hoplites certainly would have been the premier soldiers on the battlefield, so hoplite, I guess. That doesn't mean that there weren't guys below them. There were. Those were slingers, skirmishers, and everybody else, so sling. This is supposed to be a sling in case you're interested. This bow, javelin as well, so people who threw spears effectively. Those guys would be on a classical Greek battlefield. Let's just make our formation here. Dear God, this is fucking ugly. This is the main battle line, right? Good luck understanding anything. So this is a tight body of troops, effectively two blocks smashing into each other, right? For a long time, it was imagined that this was a pushing contest, because even in some primary sources, we actually hear that two formations of hoplites would actually start turning and moving, and they would interestingly move counterclockwise. They would move like this. Why? Well, again, where's the weak point in the phalanx? It's doing this stupid shit again, isn't it? Yeah, it's doing this stupid shit again. Well, the greatest pressure would be going here, right? Well, I already said if you're doing this, it's already going to start going to that guy, and then same goes for this guy. So you're going to start basically rotating, and we hear some reports of battles where kind of the two forces just rotated around each other on a pintle. Obviously, the stronger force would start pushing the weaker force until eventually enough force came, usually from the flanks, so encircling the flanks of the formation, which is unprotected. We're taking, for example, these are the winners in this. So, that the guys in the back, so these guys here, would start to run. And why is that? Well, these guys here, they would be the elite, the veteran, the trained, and these guys in particular would be the best of the best, the ones on the left, which is where the commander, for instance, usually went. What about these guys, though? Who are these dudes? These are the inexperienced ones. These are the dudes who don't have years of combat readiness. Once they start getting engaged, once the formation starts to break down, well, they're not going to stick around. They're going to fucking run. When they start running, the guys in front are going to get surrounded and cut down effectively, which is where most casualties came on an ancient battlefield, or well, in any pre-modern battlefield, really. The biggest casualties happened when the formation broke, so that's cool. Let me just get rid of my incredibly artistic depictions of doo-doo dog shit. So where did these skirmishers come into play? Well, they would have been here in loose formations, around flanking effectively, or rather, not flanking, protecting the phalanx on both sides. They would have been throwing shit at the phalanx and at each other. And they would have effectively been skirmishing to make sure that, for instance, these guys didn't get the idea to just encircle the enemy. It would be the point of these guys. So if, for instance, a block of units decided to leave the phalanx and attack them, well, these guys would then form a line and try to block them, right? They typically be armed with smaller shields and javelins and swords and shit. And it's important to note with them in particular that these guys wouldn't be armored. They would have had little to no armor in any meaningful sense. They would have been oftentimes equipped with either just a small round shield or with a shield that's specific for the Thracians. Very typical of them. If you play the Total War game, you know the unit I'm talking about. These are Javelineers. He has a little hat. This is pure art, by the way. Little thing. These are not pants. These would have been a skirt. Why am I drawing pants? I don't know. Or rather, these would have been a long tunic, effectively. So these guys are the contrary to the heavy hoplite, and they're there to make sure that nobody gets any interesting ideas about silly stuff like going around the phalanx. Hopefully, maybe. That's the ideal. That's the platonic ideal of hoplite warfare, and what we think hoplite warfare in the early classical may, but not necessarily would, but could have looked like. Is this what we see in the archaic? Probably not. Again, let's go back to the vase. Does this look like a tight man-to-man formation to you? Doesn't to me. It doesn't to a lot of people, to a lot of historians either. It doesn't. And another interesting clue as to the fact that these guys probably weren't fighting in incredibly tight formations. These guys are mostly naked, you can see them. I mean, this guy clearly has some kind of armor, right? But obviously it's artistic license because they're heroic, so they don't need armor. But they clearly have armor. And why would you need armor if you're fighting in an extremely dense formation? Now I hear you, armor is useful. Yes, it is. Is it useful enough to justify wearing the heaviest possible equipment? Fully uncovered heavy equipment? No, it isn't. Take a look at the evolution of Greek helmets, starting with the Corinthian and the Illyrian one. The Illyrian one it becomes a Chalcidian one, in case you're interested here, and then effectively you can see that these two are kind of related, which is very likely. So this is very much the archaic. This breakpoint kind of here is where the classical starts, in case you're interested. Then the further on you go, like 400s. So the end of the Peloponnesian War, like 400. Hang on, the end of the Peloponnesian War is 403. No need to be a semantic hassle. What do we see here? Do we see the armor getting heavier? Actually, no. You see, these are like this near entirely encompasses the face. This doesn't. This is much more open, but you can still see it's a large, heavy helmet. Look at this helmet. This is pretty heavy. Look at this. This is also near entirely encompassing the body. Look at this shit. This entirely. Okay, I'm gonna get to that one. Probably not the best choice because this actually isn't worn on the face. This is worn like if you've ever seen Rome Total War. This is what these would have been worn like. Which you can also see because of the extremely pulled back tail in this one. This is what they would have looked like. This typically is how they would have been worn, funnily enough. Because this is really small, and we know that it wouldn't have been practical to wear in a face mask. But you can see these are fully uncovered face masks. What do we actually see? Well, we actually see that the slit gets... Okay, this one gets longer, right? You see the very typical triangular look that a lot of modern like reconstructions of a hoplite helmet have. This one. This look here, right? I mean, even Mandalorian copies it. Probably not my best work, is it? this typical, very typical silhouette. And then what happens? Well, is that more protective than this? Well, kind of. It protects the throat, right? But the eye slits got bigger. Strange, isn't it? And even more importantly, that's more open. That's completely open. That's an open-faced helmet. Doesn't even have a nasal guard anymore. Same with this. Look at this Chalkidian one. Has a nasal guard, has larger fins. Then look at this one, is even more open. How come that? And then this one here, the end of the classical, or not actually the end of the classical, because the end of the classical comes with the Hellenistic period and the Battle of Hyrnea. Hyrnea, no, whatever. They get more open. Greek helmets get more open as time progresses. You can see these are near entirely covering the face. And by this point, this is an open face helmet. Now, do they stop covering the face completely? No, very far from it, obviously. But you can definitely see there's a continuous trend towards less armor as time progresses, or less face armor. And that's not just helmets. I guess it's the time to bring out the big PP, the internets from far more intelligent men than me. This is an archaic hoplite. Shout out to Stefanos. Sorry that I'm blatantly stealing your stuff, but this is an archaic hoplite. This is his equipment. He has a lot of defensive equipment. You can see this is the hoplon, or called the aspis as well. Varies, obviously. This is the muscle cuirass. At this point in the archaic and in the early classical, the muscle cuirass is the most common. Later on, linothoraxes, and then later on, scale and mail armor become more common. By the Hellenistic period, you rarely see muscle cuirasses used by frontline troops. Those are more, oh god, those are mostly for commanders. Why? Well, for one, cheaper. they're cheaper, but for another part, they're lighter and more easy to breathe in. You can see this is a fully enclosed helmet. And you can also see this guy has shoulder guards. I don't recall exactly what it would have been called in Greek, but has full, not pauldrons, he has spolders, effectively. He has a vambrace, which is an arm guard, at least on one arm, possibly in both, from our best understanding. And then he has also thigh guards, which are either fully encompassing or protect the lower leg, the greaves. The greave is the part that protects the calf and the lower leg. The upper leg is also, and then you can also see a distinctive apron. And this is kind of a reconstruction of something vaguely similar, obviously with a bigger crest. But again, we've seen crests. We know that crests, at least artistically, exist. Let's go back to our friend Diamphora. This guy's wearing the same crest, effectively. Well, not the same crest, but a very similar crest. So it's clearly that this, some liberty obviously must be taken. It's a reconstruction or reenactment. We don't have it. You can't. There is no fully preserved plate armor, but you can see this is a man armored hip to toe. What hip to toe? What the fuck did I just say? Head to toe. Head to toe in bronze. He is armored. He is ready. He is ready to fight, and he's ready to slap. One question, if you're fighting in a very dense packed formation, man to man, what do you need all that armor for? What's the apron protecting if you have a shield in front of you? It's a secondary useful fallback, sure, but that shit's heavy, and this is the Greek sun we're talking about. You will get heat stroke. You will get fucking heat stroke. Why are you wearing that much armor? Why is an archaic hoplite wearing that much fucking armor? Well, possible reason. One that's increasingly become common in academic field is that they didn't fight in these type formations, at least not initially. Early hoplites fought in much looser formations. It was still protected each other, of course. Fighting alone is mostly a stuff of heroic legend, but you have a guy here, a guy here, a guy here, maybe a guy here and here. This isn't a tight man-to-man formation. They have shields, they have spears. The Dory is, even by this point, the primary weapon, absolutely. But this isn't a log, this isn't a single solid formation, you know. If this is man-to-man protecting each other, I've already drawn it, so I probably shouldn't have deleted it, but this is what a typical phalanx looks like. With helmets, obviously, here. So these are our favorite Spartans, because the Spartans actually historically, and we'll get to that, didn't wear much. They wore a Pelos hat or Pelos helm, which is just a simple conical hat with a brim. Very, very effective. I mean, it's effectively a medieval kettle helm. Excellent visibility, lightweight, cheap to make. Great. Again, not a full Corinthian, which is funny because the Spartans never really practiced that many full Corinthians. This is likely more in line with what you would have seen if you went to an ancient battlefield in the Archaic. Not a line of soldiers completely heterogeneously shoulder to shoulder like this, but one guy here, another guy a few distance here, one guy maybe has a bigger distance here, and then this guy has a spear pointed at you, this guy has a spear up, and then this guy has a spear pointed at you as well, but it's over the shoulder. You see, in that kind of fighting, there's actual value in heavy armor. Because again, look at how tightly these shields are packed. Look at how tightly these shields are packed. You don't need chest plates, you don't need large muscle cuirasses, you don't need a lot of protection for anything other than the legs, maybe, if you have this type of formation. Against projectile weapons, it doesn't matter, you have helmet, you have a shield. Against spears, again, unless the formation breaks, you're protected. And keep in mind, every piece of armor, it doesn't exist on the battlefield alone. You need to pay for it, you need to maintain it, you need to repair it, you need to fucking wear it in the sun. You're gonna be walking around campaigning. You might be in armor for entire days on end if the enemy is indecisive, or if you are indecisive and trying to skirmish around and not give battle. It's not like both armies would have just found each other and ran into each other immediately. You would have been walking around in the fucking sun, dehydrated, warm as shit, and in full armor. That's a recipe for heat stroke. There are very, very real tactical downsides to attempting to wear heavy armor, especially armor as heavy as this in the Mediterranean sun. If you don't need to wear that much armor, you wouldn't wear that much armor if you were a sane man. So why did they wear it? So why did they wear it? Because they didn't fight shoulder to shoulder, did they now? They much more likely fought in a way that would evolve into the kind of extremely dense formation that maybe existed, but possibly didn't, of the classical era. The logs smashing into each other. These guys would have fought again in a looser formation. A kind of transition from the semi-ritualized. This combat would have been semi-ritualized, so from the kind of random skirmishes of the Dark Age, in which individual just performance of soldiers would have been important, as much for the fact that these were a dozen dudes likely slapping each other in the field instead of hundreds. Which is something that I will also talk about. Populations grow, and with them grow the size of armies. In the Archaic, a few hundred men battling is a notable occasion that will be sung for history. In the Classical, you have armies of multiple thousands going at each other. Like the Spartans are besieging, what's the city in? Was allied to Thebes? Fucking forgetting. Plataea. The Spartans are besieging Plataea with like 6,000 men. Not all of them are Spartiates. Absolutely not all of them are Spartiates. A lot of them are not. A lot of them are mercenaries, a lot of them are allies. That's still 7,000 men. You would not find 7,000 men in an archaic battlefield. That does not happen. it's kind of a transition from the loose skirmishing one-on-one combat of the heroic age, of the Dark Age, in which individuals' skill in arms define battles, and into the systematized mass infantry formation battlefield of the classical. And right in the middle of them, we have the archaic hoplite. Okay, so I hope I made my thesis, not really a thesis, it's just repeating what many more intelligent people than me have said for about 50 years now, ever since the idea of the hoplite revolution. This is an archaic hoplite. He is very much a walking tank. He is, again, he doesn't fight fully alone. He's clearly fighting in a formation. We see that from graphic depictions. We know that from literary evidence. But he ain't fighting entirely in a mobile, in a static formation, is he? There's gaps. People move. Guys shuffle around. And there's skirmishers all around. And there would be skirmishers all around. And there would continue to be. You know, the Peltast is the unsung hero of Greek warfare. Because whereas the hoplite gets all the praise, and objectively looks cooler, the Peltast is probably the one making sure nobody comes up and stabs him up the ass. By the classical, again, we actually see a change. Change in the heaviness and the equipment of the classical soldier. Or rather, the classical at this point. The hoplite is a citizen soldier. He transitions from warlords and the retinues of warlords from the early, like the late geometric, the late Dark Age, and the early archaic. They translate from these probably close hetarioi friends of the Basileos and these warriors who have land and who are buried in expensive and capable graves, almost aping the heroic burials of the Dark Age. And increasingly, these guys become systematized, become organized, become soldiers, and their class widens. No more is the richest man in the village and his two buddies, the hoplites. Increasingly, hoplites are just any citizen, any free man who can fight is expected to be a citizen. Hey, there's a Chalcidian helmet. We see again a change in the ancient hoplite, in the Greek hoplite, into this guy. And you can see this guy's armor is, it's there, evidently, but his main protection is the hoplon. You can see his armor is much lighter. The spear has gotten larger, probably, because again, I mean, would it have gotten larger? We don't know. Even archaic evidence shows the Dori, the main spear, which interestingly would have been spiked in both ends. That's an interesting fact that this recreation either omitted or didn't bother to show. They would have been spiked at both ends, certainly by the classical period, and they would have been typically between 2 and 2.5 meters long. So this is actually a pretty good length, because that's about, what, if this guy's 160, yeah, that's 2.5. That's correct, taking into account perspective, that's about 2.5 meters. That's perfectly capable, that's perfectly normal spear length, even in medieval era. That's how long spear is, that's how long partisan is in the early modern period. That's not how long a pike is, but a sarissa could get up to 7 meters long, so those are obscenely large, but I mean, this guy's fine. This guy's enjoying life. But you can see, this is much lighter equipped. Why? He's fighting in a dense formation. He doesn't need that much armor. Armor is a fallback. If you're getting hit in the armor, something's gone terribly wrong, but better to have it than not needed than not have it. And you can see, it gets lighter. The armor gets over time lighter. I mean, this is a hoplite of the 5th century. This isn't an armored figure that can't move. This is a much more normal soldier. Still well armed. Still absolutely... excuse me, this is not from 750, this is from 560. There you go. I was completely wrong in that. Disregard that. But you can see these are much more reasonably what would you call it? Much more reasonably armored men, effectively. I like how this. I didn't even know that the ah. So they actually talk about yeah. Okay, good. So they actually talked about the formation of yeah needed to be distributed to population only increased implemented believed only once armor was in place of formation. Okay, nice. They actually bothered to show them. Huh, good, nice. That's actually quite good, and I'm actually quite happy of that. Uh, I didn't read the Wikipedia, by the way. I was just desperately looking for some pictographic evidence, or rather, just something for a stream, rather, just any kind of stuff. But it's nice that they actually went into the development theories and the Hoplite Revolution. You can see this is the 4th century, so this is the Hellenistic era. These are professional soldiers at this point. These are not citizen soldiers. Look at their equipment. That's not a heavy hoplite. You know. What does this tell us, effectively? Well, importantly, it kind of tells us that Greek arms and armor got lighter over time because there wasn't much need for them in a dense infantry formation that would have offered each individual in it more protection than they could afford themselves alone. So they have to rely less on armor. This also goes with the institutionalization of the hoplite, who goes from again that kind of heroic element to a citizen soldier, a free farmer who has a few slaves. You know, he's not the poorest of the poor. He has enough money to participate in politics, which is a lot of money in ancient Greece. Like, not every peasant could do that. He probably has a relatively large estate, could afford for himself some armor and equipment, because again, armor wasn't issued mostly. Armor would typically be bought personally for the soldier. Uh, by the soldier, rather, not for, by the soldier. Um, uh, that would have been expensive. Not everybody could reasonably afford that. But with the decrease in the heaviness of body armor, more people could, and you would start to see citizen soldiers and the class effectively, hoplites effectively become a class in Greek society. They start being a few isolated individuals. They start being more more social class, effectively a middle class. For instance, in Athens, as the transition from a barter-based agricultural economy slowly takes place over the years. I mean, even during Solon's time, we know that there were upheavals because of moneylenders and the consolidation. What would today be referred to as the consolidation of capital, and the introduction of a monetary economy and the development of trade, craftspeople. For instance, Port of Piraeus, excuse me, beyond simply being the main port of Athens for trade, would have also been the center of its manufacturing. That's would have been close to the docks. It makes sense. You would have had skilled craftsmen from all over Greece, mistoi, foreigners, not xenos. Xenos is a thing. A xenos is somebody from outside of Greek society, effectively. A mistoi is a foreigner, but foreigner to the polis, not foreigner to the civilization, effectively. Those guys would have settled down. They would have become basically what we would today consider kind of proto middle class, skilled tradesmen, cobblers, tailors, blacksmiths, various forms of artisans. And increasingly, again, monetary economy starts to dominate. By the time of the Delian League, you're very much in a monetary world where money is money and money is rightfully used by everyday citizens. It's still a large denomination, you know. A drachma was a lot of money, but increasingly something that you could reasonably walk into a shop with and expect to be told something else than fuck off. Kind of like if you attempted to walk into a shop and pay with a gold bar today. I mean, technically, yeah, the gold is still recognized as valuable, although it's not the basis of currency anymore. But I'm not sure a cashier, or a clerk, a store clerk, would be particularly enthusiastic about you giving them that's a solid brick of gold, as valuable as it is to buy a pack of bubble gum, right? And that's like early denominations of Greek monies from the first ones that were minted all the way back in the early classical, um, and even the archaic actually. Those are large denominations. Those are gold coins. You would not be paying for just any ordinary shit with one of those. Those were as much a political tool, a sign that, hey, I am a polis, I'm an officially established polis, as opposed to those ugly barbarians up north who don't know the city state. I am independent. I make my own coins. I don't require anybody else. They were as much a statement of national pride as they were actually practical for trade. And then later on, they become smaller and smaller denominations. Why? Because more and more people use them, and you can't pay with 50 grand for something that costs 200. You just be told to go away. Nobody has that money on hand to give you back. You need smaller denominations, and we see the denomination drachma becomes smaller and more useful, and monetary economy we see in burials, for instance, more and more money coming around, and money generally being talked about more. And, land starts being less and less. Okay, in all pre-industrial societies, land is money. That's true for the Greeks. That's true for the Romans. That's true for the medieval era. That's true for the fucking class. That's true for the Bronze Age. That's true for pre-industrial revolution France. Just the way it is. In a pre-industrial agrarian society, land is money. But increasingly, the value of said land is referred to in money and not in heads of cattle. Why? Money is generally more liquid than cattle, more easily interchangeable than cattle. So, more useful. Once you start requesting payments, for instance, in not in, goat kids, and like chickens and kilos of wool. Kilos at this point, it would have been libras, but pounds effectively, or where the pound comes from, the term pound. Right? Once you start requesting money instead in taxes, that's a pretty good sign that the economy is starting to move into a more monetary based system, and that more wealth is consolidating, that there are people who can use that money, not just agriculturalists. And as the cities grow and prosper, so rises the number of the citizen class, of the citizen soldier who defends his home, and during the Peloponnesian War especially, that's who we see. That's first and foremost who we see. Um, those are large armies fight. They fight as organized, professionally led armies, led by generals, of whom, at least on the Athenian side, one ended up writing a history of the Peloponnesian War that, to this very day, is the main, not the exclusive, but one of the main sources we know of the war. Because, frankly, Thucydides was surprisingly objective in his description, also surprisingly modern in his description. Guy had a knack for it. Apparently was a better writer than general, because he did get exiled for failures in Macedonia by the Athenians. Not being exiled by the Athenians during the Peloponnesian War was a particularly rare sight to me. By the fucking end, just about everybody was exiled from Athens. But still, not really. I'm getting onto another fucking tangent again. Dear God, this entire stream is just me increasingly losing the plot and going on tangents. By the classical again, citizen soldier, kind of middle class, if you can use the term middle class to refer to anybody in the ancient era. You can't, clearly, but kind of a faux middle class, what we would today recognize as somebody well off enough to afford armor, to afford to be able to fight. The urban poor certainly didn't have any chance of doing so, and the rural poor were more concerned with just surviving than any fighting. Um, Again, by this point, you end up with the classical hoplite. Let's go back to our story of Nolan's Odyssey. Okay, hi, it's me again. My camera unfroze itself. How long has it been in this low frame state? You know what? Better not think about it. I don't watch my VODs because I dread what they look like in case you're interested. This is our hoplite. What does Nolan boy have to present us with? What's his hoplite look like? Oh god. Huh. Ain't that funny? Kinda looks like a hoplite of the classical period, but not really because honestly, my dude, I wouldn't be wearing that shit either. This is ugly AF. What does that tell us about the modern conception of what a Greek soldier was? Because Odysseus is not in any way poor. He's not a member of the middle class. He's not a part of a polis. The historical Odysseus is a king of Ithaca, a Mycenaean king of Ithaca, of Vanax. This is not the Mycenaean king of Ithaca, evidently. We can see that. We know that the film doesn't pretend to be that. Popular consciousness doesn't remember him as that. But what is he? Is he a hoplite? I don't know. Hoplite is a citizen soldier, but does modern history remember not modern history. Modern history is very pedantic about what is and isn't hoplite. Does modern society regard him as a hoplite? Maybe. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The armor certainly could fit one. Oh, if you squint. So what's the point of making this comparison? Why am I bringing up Nolan beyond just trying to get sound bites? And shit on a movie that I don't particularly like. I think it's very interesting the way in which modern conceptions of what a soldier is influence our view of the past and how we costume and think of characters in the past and how we interpret what a hoplite is. In the modern day and age of voluntary armies, the idea of the citizen soldiers kind of fading away. Professional soldiers, people who are paid to fight, whose profession is to war, are the norm. Professional armies are universal, and large conscript-based armies absolutely exist, but they're not really world-leading, are they? So, what does the modern world have for the hoplite? The movies. The brave king of Ithaca fighting back in a bastardized hoplite costume. Odysseus is portrayed as very humble in this movie. I don't think that's a mistake. Certainly, modern audiences find humility much more of worthy trait than the ancient Greeks would. Although, again, ancient Greece is a term that refers to fucking anything between 1000 BC and 476 AD. So, you know, okay, opinions changed, certainly. But the Odyssey in general, again, it's very clear from the movie itself that Nolan was not interested in the ancient Greek world. Hell, he wasn't even interested in the Odyssey. He made it because it sounded good and he knew people would recognize the name. Nolan was interested in telling a modern morality tale, one that weaves poorly, I should note, one that poorly attempts to weave ideas of apocalypticism with a moral decline by reiterating Zeus's law, which you know this guy broke Zeus's law. He made Zeus angry. Who we gonna smite his ass? Baldy McBoldface is gonna throw a fucking lightning bolt at him. Uh-oh. God damn it, stop it. Baldy McBoldface is gonna throw a lightning bolt at our Odysseus. Fuck this, I'm drawing Zeus. But this guy broke the law. He broke the code of conscience. I mean, very ham-fistedly, the movie even explicitly says that the decline of our world, of our age of bronze, is coming because we broke Zeus's law and I did unspeakable war crimes in Troy, which the ancient, the original story of the Iliad and the Odyssey say, hell yeah, good job, nigga. Good job on burning and raping that city. That's what you, bro. That's what you deserve, bro. Obviously, modern conceptions say that burning down full civilians is not valid, which makes sense, and that is the ultimate breaking of Zeus's law, for which Odysseus is punished and effectively dies in the movie, and then comes back a changed man, and then takes back Ithaca, the knowledge he's learned. And I was honestly not really paying attention by the point he comes back. It was only really looking at the fight scene with the suitors at that point, but yeah. Okay, give me some break. It was a very boring movie. Very brown movie as well, fuck's sake. That's also another thing that tells us about modern conceptions. Everybody's fucking brown. Everything is shit. Everything is poor, and everything has to be brown. God forbid color exists. Because they didn't live in an industrial world, which means they were poor, which means nobody had color, because that's what color means. It means wealth, and you can't have wealth if you're poor, and you're poor because you don't have industry. I mean, you are poor, obviously. The ancient Greeks were much poorer. It's just less does not imply lower quality. The quality of clothing in the ancient world really wouldn't have been much lower than handmade sewn clothing today. Just would have been a lot more expensive and a lot rarer and a lot fewer in number because you could mass produce it. Honestly, a lot of mass produced items are probably of lower quality than what our ancestors had. Good luck finding a modern dress that's going to survive 200 years in a tomb. Or even more, God forbid. But there are some Victorian dresses out there still that haven't fallen apart. Good luck finding that today. Because quality and quantity do not mean the same thing. But again, that's kind of a modern thing. And it's interesting, for instance, how a story about that's clearly more supposed to be aimed at the modern day audience than anything about the ancients. Because about the ancients, they're dead. You know, portrays Odysseus. He's supposed to be kind of a hoplite, not really, but he's equipped more like a hoplite than he is equipped to Mycenaean warlord, or hell, even an archaic hoplite. He's supposed to be a citizen soldier, at least theoretically. He's in touch with his people, unlike those evil suitors who abuse their power. He's a modern hero. He's really middle class. He's the ruler of a fucking island, but you know, he emboldens and not emboldens. He lives in the idea of the middle class. Effectively, he's industrious. He's humble. He doesn't like ostentatious displays of power or wealth, unlike the suitors. You know, he's defending his home, at least by the end, when he's fighting, obviously, the main first part of the movie, burning down Troy. That's very much not defending anything, but, you know, it's interesting that that's how the hoplite is remembered, and that's how Nolan decided to portray Odysseus. I think it says a little bit more about our society today than it does anything about the past, because, again, the Odyssey does not care about the past. The past is set dressing for the Odyssey. It's very much a modern story in which Nolan attempts to say that disrespecting whatever moral laws are leading to the collapse of our world, you know, it's a cautionary tale. How true or not that cautionary tale is, I'll leave the discussion, not really what I'm trying to argue here. But it's interesting the visual language he uses to convey that. What armor does Odysseus wear? Effectively, again, we come to that point. What does a hoplite mean today? what did the hoplite mean in the ancient Greek times? I hopefully at least explained a little bit how they evolved, how they changed from heroes to soldiers, effectively, how they declined when professional pikemen replaced them. Simply, a professional soldier can fight better than a citizen can, and large states can levy large armies of professional soldiers. Certainly, the Greeks found that out when they came against the Romans and their legions. Well, they learned that at Hieraea as well. It's an interesting discussion, a discussion that I feel, especially at the end, I haven't really. I feel like I've bungled this ending a bit, and I've not really made my point insanely clear. But the historic hoplite, their modern conception, and how they are represented in media are all tightly interlinked but separate. And they represent a kind of civic virtue that modern democratic societies attempt to capture effectively. And the idea of the hoplite, the citizen soldier who defends his hearth and home, is still clearly heroic archetype. Even in an age where even today, good luck finding conscript soldiers. So any army worth its salt relies on professional soldiers and has only secondary reserve conscripts if things go really badly. Like, I don't know, year 4 plus of a 3-day special military operation badly, at which point, yeah, there's probably not professional soldiers left. But you know, the idea of the citizen soldier, it's clearly important today. It clearly shapes our conception of the ancient Greek hoplite as this noble force, as this edifice of civilization, effectively, especially in retellings of the Greco-Persian Wars, as a divine struggle between civilization and order, and democracy, and the barbaric Eastern tyrants who would seek to make all men slaves. That's obviously not historically accurate in any way, since, again, you know, if you've been online, you probably have heard that the Achaemenids probably were nicer to their subjects than the Greeks ever were to each other, but, you know, different story. It very much exemplifies a kind of modern middle class civic duty and pride mindset that even in the West today is slowly fading as people slowly start to get less involved in politics, and the middle class kind of shrinks economically and by necessity politically, effectively ages out. A lot of modern young people are not middle class, they can't afford that. Either you went up with the upper class or you effectively lost the gravy train in the modern economy. And again, with professional soldiers, unlike, for instance, the conscript-based armies of World War II, where everybody was a citizen soldier, and the actual professional pre-war armies were very small. Pretty quickly disappeared. It's interesting to circle back to my original point that Nolan's Odysseus is not an archaic hoplite who has heavy armor and is a shining beacon on the battlefield. Certainly has nothing to do with Mycenaean warlords. He very much looks like a middle class white guy fighting to get home, not for some grand empire, not for the city. And I think our perception of the hoplite also is strongly impacted by our perception of today, effectively. And hopefully, firstly, I gave a little bit of insight into what the hoplite is, or at least a very broad overview of what the hoplite is. Hopefully, a little bit more into how they may have formed. Not certain that this is exactly how it went down. It's just what I recall reading and what my professors mostly. Oh, it's my opinion, obviously, but it's mostly parroting, I think, what my professor's trying to condense down to me about the Hoplites, and Greek warfare in general, and how it tells us a lot more about the society of the ancient Greeks than just about military tactics, and how material culture influences, or rather, how material culture is influenced and is a reflection of the societies that make it, from the basically unequipped retards of the Dark Age, the warriors of the Mycenaean era, the armored walking tanks of nobility of the um, archaic, let's say, the archaic to the citizen soldier of the classical, until they get their ass beat by the professional pikeman legionary. It says a lot about the social fabric of the societies that gave us those soldiers, which is necessarily reflected in their equipment. And I think that's an interesting lens to analyze the Odyssey and Christopher Nolan's film. What does it say? What does Odysseus' armor of today say about our society? Is it supposed to be representative? What kind of ideals does this hero wear? Because it very clearly isn't the hero of ancient Greece who wears enough armor to count as a fucking counts as an armored fighting vehicle. um, that's kind of an interesting view. I don't like the Odyssey. I think it's a relatively bad movie, and that frankly shouldn't have been about the Odyssey in the first place, and really would have been better off just either being an original story, or taking more liberties and just being more openly about modern day ethics. I really wish the set design was more inspired than the color brown. I'm always reminded of that scene in the behind the scenes documentary where Nolan is complaining that on the beautiful Aegean Sea he wanted fog, and a dolphin came up when the crew were filming, so they had to reshoot. I think it's a very emblematic thing of a man who's very much ignoring the nature of beauty around him to tell a story exactly the way he wants, not realizing that that's probably making the story less interesting, because dark and gritty does not mean realistic. The world is beautiful and it's full of color, and has been since men first walked upright, and even long before it. The ancient Greeks and the ancients in general loved color probably more than even we do today. It was a world that had plenty of blood and mud and shit in it, but also plenty of genuine beauty, plenty of silk, plenty of genuinely beautifully made ornaments and tools and everything else. Also because, again, when you're not using industrial manufacturing, everything is being handmade, the actual difference in the amount of time it takes to decorate something is pretty small. Now, in a modern conveyor line, that's multiple steps. If you're making just a piece of pottery or a helmet, but you're already going to be spending multiple days on it, with 2 or 3 more days to just embellish it a little bit. Especially if you're making it for yourself, or somebody who's important to you, which typically you are in a small society that's much more interconnected on a local level than today, but much less connected on a global level. Basically what I'm trying to say is that the Odyssey is, frankly, to me, much more interesting as a reflection of the modern day reality and the modern day systems and anxieties that the world faces, and how it attempts to represent them, than it is in absolutely any way as either a movie about the Iliad, or even really a movie at all, or certainly the weakest link is historical, but it's clear from Nolan's own statements there was no intent to be historical. He didn't care about history. History is a setting, and the Iliad takes place, the Odyssey rather, Nolan's Odyssey takes place in some place in ancient Greece where people wore pants. So in ancient Greece in 2021 or 2026, 2019, or wherever you want to put it. That's when the Odyssey takes place. I don't know when the film was filmed. That's the setting. Is it a good setting? No. Is it a good film? Personally, I don't like it much. I feel like its delivery is ham-fisted. Its message is not really relevant to the source material, which gets the point of why you even bother to make it about the Odyssey and not just something original. the costume design is just fucking ugly, and it's very annoying. It's not annoying. It's sad to see that again. There clearly are elements and people who did bother to look at what the My Canadian World looked like, and then Nolan just came and stamped any idea of interesting visual language, especially if it looked even slightly out of our conception of the ancient era, uh, just smashed it immediately, and there was no talk about it. And anyways, kind of a warning that directorial vision is critical to making a film, but also if your vision chokes any life out of the movie, well, maybe take a step back. Um, it's not a terrible film. It's just boring, in my opinion. The Odyssey. It's ham-fisted. It's not really well delivered, and it doesn't look nice. It's very dark and gloomy, and not really my favorite kind of movie. Not terrible again. Very much a 6 out of 10. It's fine. I don't regret seeing it. Well, yeah, I don't regret seeing it, but certainly I'm not planning on ever watching it again, and um, certainly don't intend to dissect any further because many more people have dissected the armor of the Odyssey to a much higher standard than me and have pointed out the notoriety, the large number of problems with its frankly very cheap and lazy costume design. But again, kind of missing the point if you do that. I'm not saying it's not valuable as a teaching tool to teach people what ancient Greece really looked like, but not really the point of the Odyssey. It's like critiquing an anti-war film on its portrayal of marital relations. It's not really the point. How war affects people negatively, mostly, certainly in any modern anti-war movie. Rightly so, war is depicted as a terrible and unimaginably horrible thing. Like, to be clear, that's that's how it should be. When the point then is like it's clearly not about the past. The movie isn't a documentary. It's not about the past. So nitpicking this is not really adding much to the discussion. Like, if Odysseus was wearing fully historically accurate armor, would that make the Odyssey a better movie? No, not really, because it wasn't really ever about historicity. And I think the choices that were made in how the crew of the Odyssey were outfitted again tells a lot about the directorial intent, but also about the society that made the Christopher Nolan film. So hopefully at least some part of this was useful or interesting. Honestly, I only made this because I personally was feeling a burning urge to explain myself more or less, just scream into the void as I usually do. It's what I use streaming for mostly, just an escape, a way of screaming into the void to feel like I've said something that's meaningful to me. I don't know how well across I got anything in this frankly very spastic and poorly prepared stream, I guess. If anybody's interested in reading a bit about ancient Greek warfare, feel free to visit any of the sites I showed. Credit to all of them. I take no credit in any way for anything. Again, as I said, I'm mostly just regurgitating shit I've read already. For books, probably not the one to give recommendations, but the book we used for for our studies, which again 2 years ago, but was for the My Canadian World. If you want to read about the actual My Canadian World itself, the book we used, and it's a pretty okay one, was John Chadwick's The Mycenaean World, or Nikinsky Sveten, certainly. So that's a useful introduction. John Chadwick is a pretty important historian in the development of the Mycenaean studies. Book's kind of a bit outdated, but it's still a good entry. It's what we use mostly, along with obviously supplemental work by our professors. Um, really nice. It's an okay read. It's relatively fun. I don't really have a lot more interesting to say here, beyond the fact that that's a good book if you're interested in the Mycenaean world. As for classical antiquity, you you can very easily find very good works. The ones we use a lot of sources. My professor made one that's probably only really available in Serbian. My professor is basically, at least in Serbian, more or less made the a good introduction to the thematics of the ancient era and the ancient world. So for him, if you're speaking Serbian, so I'm gonna switch over to Serbian now. Ako ste zainteresovani za historiografiju ili historiografiju o Grčkoj i želite da imate jedan relativno sveobuhvatan uvod u celokupan svet antičkih Grka, a tako i u relativno njihovih političkih struktura, vojsku, iako to nije fokus. Ivan Jurdović, Stari Grci, portret jednog naroda je odlično delo, naravno je napisao, pa kako smijem reći da nije dobro, jel? Ali barem mislim, ja sam pročitao, obavezno se pročitam ne celu, ja sam nisam baš cijelu pročitao, ali skoro cijelu, ja sam dobra je knjiga, adekvatno je napisana, nije nešto strašno interesantno napisana u smislu umetničkog pisa, ali je akademski apsolutno utemeljena u modernom historiografskom istraživanju i mislim da je za srpsku historiografsku razumno napisana, adekvatno, nije zastarela kao što je neka naša historiografija imala poneke tendencije da bude. U svakom slučaju, ono nema šta da se više kaže. Sad bukvalno gledam uživo, ima kopija online dostupna za čitanje, imaju u bibliotekama, sigurno ima barem u Stanuloj biblioteci, ima sigurno i Srpskoj i u Gradskoj biblioteci u Beogradu, imaju u biblioteci fakulteta, Filozofskog fakulteta u Novom Sadu. Ne znam šta da kažem, i s time ću završiti ovaj segment na srpskom jeziku. So there's that, I guess. Yeah, that's about it. That's about all I have interesting to say. Hopefully this was useful to me because it's something I wanted to talk about, and I talked about it, so I feel nice now. But maybe one day somebody will will stumble onto this and will be kind of at least a cursory introduction to a brief overview of how the hoplite evolved and our modern conception of the hoplite evolved and what it is today, and how does that represent itself in our popular imagination. I guess that's really it. I don't really have much more to say. If anybody ever listens to this, thanks for listening. Word of warning again, I'm doing this off a book that I read 2 years ago fully. I mean, yeah, I read something after, but this is not a cited work, so don't go citing me for anything. You've been warned. I, again, could very well be saying something that's wrong or obsolete. Certainly I've already said something that was wrong with Me incorrectly presuming that image of Greek warfare was from the archaic and not from the just beginning of the classical. Don't I am not the Bible on anything. I am not the first source you should consult. I am certainly not the last you should consult. If this sparked somebody's imagination, I think I did a good enough job. But certainly, this is no academic lecture. I just did this because I wanted to talk about something that felt meaningful to me. And if it helps somebody at some point in the future, nice. If it doesn't, I don't really care. Uh, so yeah, that's it. See ya.